Hello, worldies, and welcome back to my naughty little channel. I hope you're all doing well today. Today, I want to talk about a bit of a heavier topic. And so, if this is not your thing, then feel free to, just wait for my next upload. I've got some other cool things up on the channel. But today, I kind of want to talk about a serious topic, more serious than I would say what I usually talk about. But I want to talk about the fact, something that I've noticed in the media about how people are very uncomfortable, like deeply uncomfortable with vulnerability and powerlessness, especially in women. And so, I want to talk about specifically one example that I'm thinking of is Cassie and Diddy. I remember when that trial was happening, being actually like genuinely surprised, which I don't know why I was so surprised by it, but I was genuinely surprised by like the lack of empathy people seem to have towards Cassie. A lot of people equated like her beauty, her status, even her ethnic background to power, and a lot of people seem to just lack complete empathy for what she went through. And I will say not only that, but I saw people even going on character assassination of her, that, well, she must have liked this. She must have enjoyed this. Well, she did this while she was, in that situation, XYZ. And I want to talk about the transfer of shame away from the person committing harm onto the person who was vulnerable enough to be harmed. So one of the things that I think is kind of like the central foundation to this is the fact that under patriarchy, not only are men taught to be strong, be capable, be leaders, be logical, don't be vulnerable, things like that, but women are also subconsciously told that those are all the male traits and everything, and that if you ever want to have any power, you need to take on basically these same traits of a toxic male. So I noticed that there are a lot of these women where they are the type where they end up shaming then, things that are thought to be not these masculine traits. Women will embody these traits of, being hyper independent, maybe being domineering themselves, not needing anybody, being super logical, always in their thinking brain. Feelings are stupid. Emotions are stupid. Emotions are bad. That's what women have, and I want to be strong and powerful under this patriarchy. And so I don't do the woman things. I don't have feelings. We end up having this crabs in a bucket mentality when we're like, in order for me to gain power under this system, I have to kind of step on the other person and basically give a pass to the person doing the harm. Because I think that for a lot of people, nobody likes to feel out of control. Nobody enjoys that. A lot of people like to feel as though, in order for something bad to happen to you, you must have asked for it. You must have agreed to it. That is even like a concept that I explore on my channel about what have you subconsciously agreed to. And I think that happens oftentimes in situations that don't involve another person, right? You may agree to being obese, and so then you have the life of an obese person. You may subconsciously be in agreement with being dusty, or I will say that there have even been situations where, for example, some women may have it backwards, maybe in how they were taught and how they were brought up or whatever, where they feel this sense of guilt for doing better and having more than the women before them. There's this sense of shame where it's almost like, well, this is as much happiness as my mother was able to experience. So this is like the cap for what I feel like I'm able to receive. And I think that in general, we like to have this sense of, well, I can control the world around me. A lot of us have trouble accepting that you can't control the world around you. You can You can only control how you react to it. And I think that because things like feeling, having emotions, being vulnerable those are all things associated with femininity. Those are all things that we look at as weak. And so I notice that, people will project this feeling onto other people, especially onto a woman who's deemed as conventionally attractive. You know, People have a hard time seeing that person as a victim. Oftentimes, we're looking for somebody to be the perfect victim. We're waiting on that. It's like, well, XYZ happened to her, but, due to the way, she's already sexy. So, I can kind of see how maybe she no longer is a victim and must have been an active participant in this. And talking about freak offs, I will say, is kind of an old thing, but this is a topic that I wanted to speak on for a while because I think that I always just see this common thread anytime there's this situation. I think it's a huge part of male centeredness, which I will say that back when the trials for like the freak offs were going on and stuff, I don't even know if I was familiar with the term like decentering men or male centeredness at the time. But I think one way that we oftentimes recognize male centeredness is through actually like the time spent. Like, oh, you're male centered because you spend a lot of time dating. You're male centered because you spend a lot of time focusing on a male partner. You're male centered because you spend a lot of time learning about how to be pleasing to men, and you focus on how to attract them and how to keep them and try and figure them out and stuff. Oh, that's male centered. All of that is male centered. However, I think that one of the most like the evilest thing about male centeredness, because the thing is, when it comes to like one individual person choosing to be, do these things that we feel are centering a man in their life, generally it doesn't hurt everyone else. It's kind of like a victimless crime for the most part. I will say that there are situations where people, and I do agree that if there are children in the situation, it can hurt them to be having that as the example, and showing them that like showing a young woman that that's how she's supposed to act in a relationship with a man. It can harm a young man for teaching him that, the same way that, your mother caters and bends to your father's every need, that's what you should go around expecting from other women. So there can be victims in a crime like that. If you want to go as far as to call it a crime. But I will say the thing that is a lot more evil is when we bend reality, we bend logic, we bend how we look at shame and responsibility and power just to keep men comfortable, to keep them from ever having to change, to grow, to keep them from being ridiculed, from being shamed. And I notice this all the time, every single situation that happens, whether it's a celebrity situation, whether it's a criminal situation, whether it's a relationship situation, anything where it's involving a man who does some sort of harm, and then a woman who is on the receiving end of that harm. Male-centeredness says that, okay, how are we going to pick this up, flip it and reverse it so that she's actually the bad one? And we do this in any sort of situation. There are so many things that I think we assign, like we hand women shame over things that they have not done. I think that because of our desire to hold on to control and everything, we want to say, like, for example, anything that we have not experienced yet. And I'll just take, this is, trigger warning. I'm going to use the example of like being SA'd. There are a lot of women who it's very hard for them to confront that this is something that happens, that, like, and it's hard to conceive, like, what do you mean that I can decide everything about my life. I can decide what I'm going to do on this day or the next. I'm in charge of all these things. It's the 2020s, so I'm a modern woman. I can be empowered in everything. And I think it's hard to accept that, in all of those things, as much as you do within your control, there are still things that are outside of your control. And so I think that instead of us, confronting that and saying like, wow, that is really a messy thing to think. That's a scary thing to think, that I could control, where I go. I can control the partners that I choose. I can control my hobbies. I can control what I wear. I can control all of these things. Yet, we just saw the whole Grape Academy. So it's almost like two realities conflicting. You cannot control if the men in your life are secretly getting together and studying how to harm you. There was no amount of wearing a hijab, wearing a burqa, never wearing makeup, never doing your nails, never leaving the house, never dressing for the male gaze, never dating such and such type of person, vetting. There's no amount of that controls what other people choose to do. And I think that because, throughout history, especially under, patriarchal systems, it's often been the men who are in the top dog position who are doing the harm, and the, women or lesser men who are on the receiving end of that harm, we want to associate with the power position. And so we push that onto other people. We want to force other people in situations where there may have been no power. There was no choice. There is no accountability to take. But for us, a lot of us, because we want to have some sort of control over shaping our future, which I definitely do believe that so many parts of your life and your destiny and your future are in your hands, I think there are certain things that are not within your hands. You could decide, I'm going to 4B, I'm going my own way. I'm not dating men. I will never wear makeup. I will never wear anything flattering. I will never go outside at night. I will never go outside alone. And you could do all these things to control all of these variables, and you could still have an invasion of your privacy. You could still have, a maintenance man in your apartment, put a camera in there to watch you. And you can still have your privacy invaded in that way. You could still have somebody break in through your window and harm you and then SA you. And I will say that, yes, those are really, I don't want to call them paranoid, but really extreme cases that are not the norm. But I think that there are so many ways that the power is not necessarily on the person. I think it's hard, and this is a concept that I think is very tough to manage, especially when it comes to conversations with other women, is kind of trying not to step on okay, so I see that, maybe subconsciously you're picking up on this other woman. She's been through XYZ thing. And the way that she's able to rationalize that is that, well, she's going to tell herself it was her fault because she did XYZ, because then she has some sort of control. We want control. I was SA'd because I wore a tube top. So if I never wear tube tops ever again, then it's never going to happen to me again. And it could be that on that day you came across somebody who was going to SA somebody, and you just happened to be there. And you could have been wearing 3 layers of clothes, and it still would have happened to you. But you decide this certain rule because we want some sort of predictability to the world around us. And so in order to protect ourselves, oftentimes we assign shame to the wrong person. There are so many things that are shameful. And to me personally, just because while I live in the system and everything, I don't necessarily want to take on the toxic male traits of patriarchy in order to gain power in this system. So for me, it's very clear. It's very clear to me to see that it is shameful to be manipulative, to be a manipulator. That is shameful. But for a lot of people, we're taught that, no, the thing that is shameful is to have been manipulated. To me, it's very clear that it is shameful to be somebody who exploits someone. However, throughout our society, it's very clear that we all seem to agree that no, exploiting somebody, no, that's not the shameful thing. The shameful part is that you allowed yourself to be exploited. You allowed yourself to be used. I think it's shameful to lie. I think that's a very shameful thing to do. But we as society, we will, to make ourselves feel more comfortable, we're going to instead assign the shame to the person who was lied to or the person who believed a lie. We do the same things with these more extreme examples. Like if, I think it's shameful for a man to be a deadbeat. Yet we will assign shame to somebody who is the single mother or is the child of a deadbeat. I think that it's shameful to be an absent father. Yet we will use terms like fatherless girls instead of piss poor excuse for a man not doing your job as a man, men. We assign the shame to the wrong person. I think it's very shameful to be neglectful. Yet we assign shame to people, children, women who are abandoned. It's shameful to me to be a person who engages in abusive behaviors. Yet we assign shame to the people who were abused. So many of us, we just completely ignore psychology, we ignore science, we ignore studies, we ignore the things that the actual experts say to, if you go to science, if you go to psychology, if you go to, the way that the nervous system and biology, you will have all of the answers for where the shame actually belongs. And this is something that you see, if you're the type of person who's ever watched content on narcissism, narcissistic abuse, things like that, you will see that this right here is actually something that fits into a narcissistic worldview. Because the narcissist is shameless, then the victim ends up absorbing all of the shame. Because a lot of times there's shame somewhere, and I think many times we are aware that certain people, the people who are causing the harm, they're not going to accept the shame. They're shameless. They don't feel bad. They don't feel embarrassed for having done it. Or, maybe they will never show outwardly that they are experiencing deep shame for being that person. And so because we need to assign shame and blame to somebody, we assign it over to the person who experienced the harm. I think especially when it comes to a woman who is pretty privileged, a woman who is conventionally attractive, it's very hard for us, especially when we see ourselves in her, to accept that, wait a minute, so you mean that you can be intelligent, attractive, loving, insightful, hardworking, somebody who may be spiritually connected or has a strong sense of faith, that you can be emotionally deep, and that you can still end up attached to a harmful person? We will completely even ignore the fact that scientifically, psychologically, many of the times, people who are causing this harm, the person who really deserves the shame, they are basically setting off biological processes, psychological processes in the victim and the person who's receiving the harm that bonds them harder, that makes them attached stronger, that turns them into a little PR person. Because I think oftentimes we're aware that, I'm not allowed to be on the receiving end of harm, because if I'm on the receiving end of harm, then I get shamed. Nobody's going to look for the person. Somebody did that to you? Oh my God, that's crazy. They should be ashamed of themselves for doing that. Instead, we say, wow, you should be ashamed of yourself that you put up with that? Oh my God, you accepted that? Oh my God, I would have never tolerated that. I would have walked away. And I think that it's really, I don't want to say upsetting, but I think that it is strange to see how we don't see how that typically is, that is male-centeredness. To me, that's male-centered. That you're going to ignore psychology. You're going to ignore biology. You're going to ignore how the actual neural pathways in the brain work. You're going to ignore studies and all of these things just to keep yourself comfortable and assign shame to somebody who, yes, maybe they were actually vulnerable. Yes, in that situation, they were powerless. And I think especially because of the way that people, especially when it comes to male-centered dynamics, you'll see more often than not, this woman who doesn't see herself in the pretty girl. And she is envious of the power that she sees that this pretty girl has. And so that she just, no, unfortunately, no, your face card will not keep you from being lied to and experiencing the harm of having been betrayed. Your face card will not keep you from being exploited. Oftentimes, what we don't even realize is that a lot of these things make you more of a target for these things, because the person who is causing the harm, they're causing it behind closed doors. And so it's like out to the public. Yes, of course, they still want a trophy to be causing the harm to. And I think it's it's upsetting that, yeah, I think before I was going to say that, no, it's not upsetting, but no, I changed my mind to yes, it is a bit upsetting to realize that, we're talking about decenter men. And I think that sometimes like we get into decentering men into like the most frivolous, trivial things, as opposed to like the big things. Like like I said, the most amount of people you can harm from maybe centering a man in a certain season of your life is just the people in your household right then and there, the people that you directly are influencing in yourself. But, when we bend logic and how we assign blame and responsibility, and even the way that we view power and powerlessness, that is very male-centered. We say that, well, he, because of the shamelessness that a lot of the people causing harm have, we say, we stop. The whole conversation never focuses on the person who caused the harm. No matter what the situation, the headline, the thumbnail, the conversation, the person who's receiving the critique and what they should have done different is always the person who was on the receiving end of the harm. And I think it would be more empowering. It would be more productive if at least it went, well, now you were powerless at that point, but now you have power now. Like, what can you do now? You're free now. You're out of that situation. You see the situation for what it was. So what can you do now? You deserve to be empowered and go forward. You don't have to be you are no longer in this vulnerable position. As a matter of fact, we'll protect you from being in that vulnerable position again by coming to your aid, by forming, a sisterhood around you to show you that, maybe the things that have been said to you that made you feel that you deserve that, you're going to be already battling multiple people from every direction, attaching shame to you instead of the person who really engaged in the shameful behavior. We're going to build you up and make you feel more protected. Instead, we pile on more critique. And what's so interesting, and this is going to bring up Blunt Girly. I recorded a video, and I've referenced this before, a video that never saw the light of day. And I want to say that the video may have been focusing on, I think what happened was I was initially inspired to make a video after I saw some of the drama that was happening between Halle Bailey and DDG. And I saw Blunt Girly release her first take on it. And at that time, she was still kind of aligned with this sector, or appearing to be aligned with this sector. So I kind of was like, well, I don't really want to come out, because at the time when I was forming the opinions and experiencing a really strong reaction in my nervous system to being like, wait, that's what you got out of that? I didn't want to come out sounding really argumentative, really combative against somebody that I looked at as an ally. And then the Sky Jackson situation happened as well. And then she came out with another situation. And I remember that's when I finally recorded a video referencing both situations, but I didn't ever release it. This was likely over a year ago that all of this occurred and was recorded. I don't even know if I still have the file for what I was saying in that situation. But I noticed that, people, they're deeply uncomfortable with the concept of vulnerability and powerlessness. And I think this is the same concept where we'll talk about compartmentalization, where your brain will literally it will pack things into neat little boxes so that you can still function. right? That's why you will see people who, maybe they become the PR person for somebody who's actively causing them harm, or they're completely unaware. Things, like repressed memories, things that we don't even remember, or they don't sink in until much later, because your brain can only do so much. It's like, okay, well, you still have to wake up in the morning. You still have to drink your water. You still have to brush your teeth. You still need to have like energy for all of your biological processes. Like as a woman, you still need to be able to menstruate. You still need to be able to like digest food. You still need to be able to process new information. You still need to be able to like retain new information, build skills, all of these things. So we're going to just, wow, that was a really messy, ugly, disgusting, terrible thing. I'm going to pack this into a neat little box and put this off in the corner, because this will distract you from these other major things that you have to do. And then once I feel like you're ready, maybe I'll just kind of rip the tape off the box, and it'll kind of just start spilling out little by little. And, it's not going to happen until you can actually deal with it. And that's something that I've experienced myself. I'm actually going to be recording an episode for my Patreon, kind of talking a little bit in depth with an experience that I had with this exact form of compartmentalization. So if that's the type of content that you like, then definitely in my video description, I always have my Patreon link. Feel free to join. I talk about a more vulnerable version of topics over there, a lot more personal experiences, a lot more just things that I feel like may, the people who are going there, they're actually looking for that content. They want to hear me expose myself and, my flaws and my mistakes and things. So definitely go on over there if you like that type of thing. But, it is this really weird transfer of shame. It's almost like destiny swapping, in my opinion, where, there's this swap of what's supposed to be happening, what the trajectory was happening. And we do that, maybe it's shame swapping or something. But it's because the vulnerability scares people. We like I said, we like to feel in control. So, if someone could be abandoned or manipulated or mistreated, cheated on, discarded, neglected, any of those things while they were trying to love correctly, maybe they were a good person, maybe they were somebody who, all these factors that we try to claim are something that makes somebody do that. What if they don't like actually fit any of those things? What if they, they had all of the makings of somebody who should be able to go out and make good decisions? What if they actually are a good decision maker? And the issue was the person trying to cause the harm. What if the problem was the person trying to cause the harm, the person actively causing the harm all along? For a lot of us, that is something that we compartmentalize and put into our box. That there's no amount of X, Y, Z that you can do that can stop somebody who has access to doing that to you and a desire to do that to you from doing that to you. That's really hard for a lot of us to allow to sink in. That's terrifying. That's absolutely scary to think that, whatever situation you may see somebody, like just type in anything that could happen, like, some sort of trauma that a woman goes through, something that happens, to accept that could happen to anyone, I think is absolutely insane. That is terrifying, which is, why I think that, and I feel like I am also guilty of this, and in my personal life, maybe even in some of my takes on here, where it's like, we even, to keep ourselves safe, we will say that, well, no, I would never go through any of those things. That would never happen to me. I would never like experience those things. Those things should be reserved for XYZ, insert superiority complex, insert hierarchy thinking, women who I perceive as ranking lower on the totem pole than me. Like, bring that behavior over there to me, or bring that behavior over there to them. Don't do that to me, because, I have hierarchy thinking, and because I see that I believe that I outrank myself to somebody else, then all of a sudden, this in my reality, I can't accept that the same thing could happen to me. And I remember being younger, and I remember when they would, I'd see older women say certain things like, never laugh at, the next woman's pain, because, like you could be in her position at any moment. And I remember being younger and I didn't really understand it. And it's very interesting that whatever the situation is, on some large or some small scale, every woman, we have to accept, we're going to be placed in situations where that is a lesson that is available to be learned if we want to learn it. But a lot of us choose not to learn it because it's really scary to think about the fact that, oh my God, the control in this, like my sense of control in the specific thing is just an illusion. It's not a real thing. It is delusion. It is absolutely delusional to think that, like, for example, if you want to talk about things like SA, it's like, a lot of the logic that we may apply to adult women who are the victims and survivors of SA, when you transfer that, when you try to apply that same logic to children, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work anymore. It's like, well, I just didn't want to entice somebody, or I guess that what I was doing was really enticing. There's nothing enticing about a child. There's nothing entitled about a child butt naked. A child can be absolutely butt naked. A child can be even mimicking like the same dances or ways of moving their body that we typically associate with an adult doing. And that's nothing about that is enticing unless the thing is unless the whole thing was really just about power and control. It was really just about, having some sense of being able to exert your dominance over somebody who could not stop you. That's what a lot of these things are about. These things that are shameful things, they're about power. It's not about somebody being naive. It's not about missing red flags. It's about power and control. And I think that a lot of times, something that we don't realize is that you don't gain anything from asking, well, what did you do wrong? Instead of asking, why did that person choose to harm you? That's why I think for me, it's very hard for me to see, especially when as women, we're always getting scapegoated for something. If a man causes you harm, then you're going to be the scapegoat. Like, well, what did you do to make him want to harm you? Like, what did you do? We don't focus on the fact that this person wanted to harm and I was just available. I was just right there for being harmed. They would have done that to somebody else. And we can sit there and go to every single victim and say, well, what did you do? Well, what did you do? Well, what did you do? And that woman, she may put herself into this little tiny bubble where she's now afraid of the world and she's afraid of being shamed for having experienced harm. And now she never speaks up anymore. And now she's like a husk of her former self. Now she's hollow and she's over there internalizing, oh, I made this happen to me. I made this happen. And while we never address the person who was doing the harm, while we were focusing on her, while we were busy assassinating her character, he went on and had the time to harm 20 more people that we're going to go do the same thing with. When guess what? No matter what we do, whether we do things quote unquote wrong or right, if the people who are causing the harm were focused on and eradicated in some sort of way, then the harm, it wouldn't have been done anymore. No matter what it is, women would be able to walk around completely butt naked and, enticing and seductive. And they would never get SA'd because the people who desire to SA wouldn't exist. That's why people in hijabs still get SA'd. That's why children get SA'd. That's why animals get SA'd. Because it's not about asking for it or wanting it or any of that. And we even will do this. I think that I have released a take on this before about how I strongly disagree with a lot of the discourse about boy moms. And I was not expecting to feel like this because if you would have asked me maybe 5-10 years ago, I was definitely on a very different side of that discussion. There was a time, which I think that that's what we do as women. We like to believe that, if the mothers just did a better job, then he would no longer want to be somebody who harms. And so, if we just shame the mom, then if we just blame the parents, then it's that it's going to stop. But if you ever look at, maybe a toxic household dynamic, and you have, two children that come out of that, and one child goes out and repeats that same dysfunction, and the other child decides to go out and heal and learn and educate themselves and become the exact opposite of that dysfunction, you get to see that, unfortunately, no, you can't even blame the parents. And yeah, that is really terrifying. That's terrifying to think that you could do everything right, even as a parent of a young boy, and he could still grow up in SA people. Like, that's just what happens. And I think that a lot of us, we would like to believe that no, harm, it can only happen to weak women, to weak people, to stupid people. And if I am just smart and I am just strong, then this harm will never happen to me. But unfortunately, that's not how a lot of things work, especially when it comes to causing harm. Some people, yes, they are looking for a weak person to harm. But there are a lot of people where, especially if they get some sort of high off of that, or it makes them feel like they're boosting their status or feeling more dominant, I will say, if I want, like, putting myself in the mind of like an abusive person or whatever, if I wanted to like show that I was dominant and this, that, and the third, no, I wouldn't go after somebody who was weak and already not feeling very great about themselves. I might target the beautiful, power, successful woman. Men target baddies. That's who gets targeted. That's why you have a lot of these women who are online talking about, I have another take I'm going to be releasing soon about Steph-Co. When I was recording that, I was like, I recorded about her before, or I wanted to record about her before. I did research for a video, got talking points together, but I don't know if I ever actually did it. But, women who maybe they don't experience the same amount of like social mobility, and like hypervisibility that women with conventional attractiveness and pretty privilege experience. So they like to say, well, thank God I have to deal with it, or thank God I don't have to deal with that. And unfortunately, it's sad that we just never get to the point of, if like, my thing is like, we're going to center men in so many ways in the first place. Like, there are so many ways that we are male centered. I wish that, a lot of these conversations could be male-centered, not in the sense of bending the whole reality to make it easier for them, to let them off the hook, to let them basically go on unscathed and without any consequences, but to say, no, bring your ass right here to the front of the class. Here's a seat right here so we can all talk about, why do you think it's okay to harm women in that way? Why? And assign the shame and the blame to the proper person. So, I think that one of the biggest connections to like this, like under patriarchy, is that under patriarchy as women, oftentimes we are taught and have internalized that your desirability is your value, and male approval is social currency. Being chosen is supposed to protect you, and that being abandoned lowers your status. Something that somebody pointed out to me recently that I didn't realize is that like a little boy is Mr., a teenage boy is Mr., a grown man is Mr., a married man is Mr., a divorced man is Mr., an old man is Mr. It's just always like the status, the title just never changes. However, from a woman, we'll go from Miss to Ms. to Mrs. And all of these ways in which we will shift a woman's identity around based on a man. So if you are on the receiving end of harm, now we're going to say, oh, well, a man decided to harm you. Well, that lowers your value. That lowers your status. So for a lot of us, that means that when a woman is on the receiving end of harm, be it exploitation, be it SA, be it, human, like, I don't think I can say that word, but human trafficking, being abandoned, being, mistreated, any of those things, we will, whether it's unconscious or it's conscious, we treat her as the one who is embarrassing. Like, oh my God, you were on the receiving end of something that, like, wow, that's so embarrassing, as opposed to the type of person who goes out and does these things. Like, I think it's just very, it's very, it's male centered. And I will say that it is, it's not like how people will talk about like benevolent misogyny, where it's like you're doing that, but it's like, oh, there's not really a victim, or like you're not trying to create a victim. You know, there are ways that for survival, for many years throughout history, women have had to adapt and become male-centered in certain ways in order to keep their access to resources, in order to keep access to their children, in order to keep access to property, in order to keep access to a home, to shelter. And that is something that, as much progress as we have made, that still is something that happens in this day and age. There are, and it, you know, it makes me sad, but there are women who will say, you know what, for my children, you know, and this is their logic, for my children, I will take on this role of being male centered. And I will say that, like, that would be like the people who, maybe they think of even like the Shira 7 type of way of being as being male centered, because everything is still about the men. It's all about getting the resources from the man. It's about getting the rich man instead of becoming the rich man. And a lot of that is, it's just women trying to survive. It's, I'm going to be exploited anyways. I'm going to be objectified anyways. I'd hope that I can just be objectified and then be able to pay my bills as well. And you know, there are women making the sacrifice to be in, you know, and it's a really sad sacrifice to make. But to, you know, be in a loveless relationship or marriage, or to deal with infidelity, to put up with any of this harm and stuff, because her whole thing is, I'm just trying, you know, I'm just in this relationship so that my son can, you know, still be able to be in all of these sports and everything. And hopefully one day I'll be able to get him out and, you know, tell him that he wasn't supposed to experience this. Like, this isn't my situation, but I've seen situations like this. And it's something that I express empathy for. And it's like, you know, that has been a thing for ages. Like, especially when we talk about things like, you know, the traditional women back in the day, we look down so much on these women who endure harm and everything. But a lot of us are only here. A lot of us only have the rights that we have now due to our great grandmothers having been, you know, the pick me, or being this, that, and the third, and literally having harm happen to her body all the time. But there wasn't even any legal recourse. Marital rape was like legal. And so I think that it's okay to say, like, I don't want to do these things, but I think to either, I think in general, to not recognize a woman's powerlessness in a situation, or even her perceived powerlessness, is a bit inhumane. It's taking away a bit of her humanity. Everybody can get into a dark cloud or this tunnel vision, especially if you're in a situation where it's like, for some people, that shameful event could have happened when they were born. And we assign shame from when they were born. And then all of a sudden, they're just supposed to go on, you know, we're going to keep shaming this person, assign them shame for this thing that happened to them where they were not an active participant, didn't ask for it to happen. And we just decide that she has to carry that shame. And then when she walks around and, you know, then stays in a situation that you feel like she's better than, or how could she have stayed with him for so long? Or how could she have gone out and duped us all into thinking that he was a good person for this long? And it's like, wow, it's so interesting that we don't connect the dots on this. I think that a lot of times people, they treat surviving, being on the receiving end of harm, like it's a stain on your character, instead of it being some sort of evidence that somebody violated your trust. And I think that for me, anytime you just scale it to anything, like I like to think of the most extreme situation, because these rules still apply when you understand how logic works. You know, if outfits cause SA, then outfits should cause SA when it happens to a child too, right? Then it was the outfit. Oh, wait, but then it should also cause, it should also be the cause of the SA when it's a woman in a hijab. But then when, then the logic all of a sudden doesn't apply, then that whole framework falls apart. And I think that humans like to believe, we would love to believe that good decisions guarantee safety, right? We have to believe that in some, way, shape, or form, because if we didn't believe that, then we probably wouldn't make decisions that lead towards a better chance at having safety. We'd like to believe that intelligence is going to guarantee protection. And it's a good thing to believe that, because then we all are reading and we're all being literate and we're all educating ourselves. We'd like to believe that having discernment is going to guarantee control, because if we didn't create that rule in our head, then we wouldn't work on developing discernment. But the reason that manipulation works, like, we're all being constant, like, it's so interesting how it's like, people will believe that we're being manipulated by social media, and we're being manipulated by the algorithm, and we're being manipulated by influencers and celebrities, and we're being manipulated by the big pharma and the big food and all of these big corporations, and it works on us, and we're just these victims. But then all of a sudden, when it's person-to-person manipulation, then all of a sudden, well, no, you were an active, willing participant. Don't try to play the victim now. And that's why you have so many people who, because of this, humans are typically by nature emotional and trusting. And I will say to, it is a bad thing, to lose your humanity. I think you can have vulnerability and trust with discernment, with doing your best to make good decisions, with doing your best to educate yourself and be intelligent and all of those things. But it is so harmful when we force people to take on this mindset of, how did I not see it sooner? Why did I stay? How could I have put up with this? Oh my God. And then you have this person who stays there in the shame that is not even theirs. And then they either repeat the cycle again and again and again, or they never leave. Yes, because if somebody's actively being harmed and you're putting them down, or you're putting down people in that position, guess what? Now they don't want to leave. Now they don't feel that they can. They psychologically don't feel like they can. And I think that it's a sad thing to see. Like I said, I'm going to talk more about this over on the Patreon with like examples of women that I've seen. And it is just really sad to see how it's a real thing that's happening in the brain, when it's like it should be, oh my God, this person is so disgusting and shameful. They do this to humans. Oh my God, I don't want this for me. I'd like to leave this, and, hopefully, this person gets help, and I'm going to tell everybody because this person deserves to be publicly shamed. Instead, we shame the person who's on the receiving end of the harm into staying, into defending themselves, defending the person who caused the harm, into silence. So then that person who is getting off scot-free, walking around shameless, they have time to go do it to hundreds more people, because we've shamed the other person out of having their voice and out of being the next person, which is why me personally, I like anytime there is some woman who does come out with a story and she speaks up, or she testifies, or she files a charge or anything, I have so much respect for that woman. And I just feel like that is the type of person that is like a really strong soldier, because it's like they're coming out saying all these things knowing they're going to be shamed, knowing that people are going to use like the most painful things they've ever experienced against them. They've already experienced it once. They've already been traumatized by it once. Then they're constantly being re-traumatized by maybe nightmares, PTSD, intrusive thoughts, obsessive thinking, and then the neutral messaging in society being triggered by, oh, I watched this movie and it made me think this. I listened to this podcast and then it made me feel this. It made me, it brought me back to this moment. And then all of a sudden it, put me in a loop. But then there are people who are actively going out of their way seeking to re-traumatize and hold people accountable, when it's like most people are living in their accountability every single day. Their nightmares are their accountability. Their PTSD is their accountability. Their feeling so shameful is the accountability that they've already experienced. I think that it is very nasty when we frame a woman as naive after betrayal, after mistreatment, after receiving some sort of harm, when it's not that she's naive. What she's doing is she's a healthy woman. It's not normal to be jaded. It's not normal to be bitter. It's not normal to be hyper paranoid and think that everybody's out to get you. I would say it's a great thing that a woman who's had an experience to where she's able to, maybe she's already experienced healthy relationships. She's seen them. She knows they exist. And so she goes through. I think it's almost a privilege to be like, wow, I'm so blessed that I've lived in this bubble that I didn't even know. Wow, people really do that. And women, they can be nurturing. They can be empathetic, optimistic, even forgiving. And we will turn all of those things into the worst thing about this woman. Make this woman hate herself for her good, positive qualities. It is a positive quality to be empathetic. It's a positive quality to be nurturing. It's a positive quality to be optimistic and forgiving, because people do make mistakes. Those are all good qualities. You know what's not a good quality, though? To take advantage of somebody's nurturing nature, to take advantage of somebody's empathetic nature, to take advantage of the fact that you know that somebody is forgiving. That is the moral failure. To say, this person is wide-eyed and they're so trusting and they're optimistic about the world. I'm going to kill all of that. That is so shameful. That's so evil, because then all of us have to deal with every time we are letting the person who's causing the harm get away scot-free, and they're going on choosing a new victim again and again and again and again. And then we have all of these people who then we have to deal with this world that we have now, where now women are less nurturing. Now women are less optimistic. Now women are less open and forgiving, because we've turned those things into bad traits when they're not. It's a normal state of being for a healthy woman. That's how you should be. That's a lot of, after, even going through something like this, a lot of the healing process is returning back to this and just including some discernment. But you can't, discernment doesn't keep women from getting SA'd. Discernment doesn't keep women from being on the receiving end of harm. The only thing that keeps women from being on the receiving end of harm is people not harming. You could be the most naive, dumbest, worst discernment having, whatever type of woman out there. And if nobody wants to cause you harm, you still won't be harmed. And on the flip side of this, a very nasty and uncomfortable truth for a lot of people is that you can be so smart. You can have so much discernment. You can think that you're the most perfect vetter. And guess what? You will not be immune to somebody who wants to cause you harm coming in and trying to cause you harm. And maybe you'll walk away faster. Maybe you will, spot it out quicker than the next girl. But I think that, it doesn't help. It just never helps. And I think that's why we have so much of, these beautiful women that you feel like they should be out there, out and about, doing this and that with all of their gifts and their talents. And they end up getting, shrinked down into silence, because they're like, well, I'm not allowed to go through harm. If I do, then the conversation will be put onto me. And so people don't even share different things that they've gone through. But I will say that over on this channel, this part of the internet, I am here to say that, having endured something harmful is not shameful, or at least it's not shameful to me. You won't be shamed for that over here. I know that there are so many places on the internet that you will be shamed for for being a healthy woman and having an unhealthy male come to you and cause you harm. You won't be shamed for that over here. I personally, you're never going to get that on this channel. I will say, I'd like to say hopefully, but that is something that if you ever feel as though that my content is doing that, then I want to be held accountable by my subscribers and everything, because that's not what my mission is. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. And so I just want to know, what do you all think about this? You know, I know that this is maybe different than my usual upload, but I just, over the last couple weeks, like, you know, albums dropping and different things happening, I am so sick and tired. Like, that's just a narrative that I can't get behind. That's a part of male-centeredness. It's a part of patriarchy that I just can't participate in. I can't say, wow, I'm going to kick you while you're down. Wow, you were on the receiving end of harm. You're a terrible person, and here's what you did wrong. Meanwhile, the person causing the harm is going on to do it to a million other people. It's still going to be done. It's never going to stop being done. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't understand. Like, to me, the fact that there are women who are hijabis who have been essayed, that is enough for me to say, oh my God, it's almost as if the person causing the harm is the problem. And this is not just essay. This is so many other different ways of causing harm. But yes, over here, you're never going to get that. It's okay if you like my channel and you like other parts of the internet as well, where there is more of this. Let's drag somebody, you know, over to the tree and tie him up and let's lynch him publicly. No, I'm not. I can't really do that. It's just, it doesn't sit right with my spirit. I know that this type of content is very controversial. And for a lot of people that don't necessarily completely understand the mission of this type of channel or this type of content, it may be something that just completely goes over your head. But this is something that I'm very passionate about, like talking about this content, releasing these takes and everything. It is something that I do honestly and genuinely, authentically create as part of wanting to contribute to the greater good. And so I don't see how shaming people, assigning shame to people who have been harmed, it just doesn't fit into my worldview as putting goodness out into the world. I have no issue with educating. I have a big issue with shaming. On this channel, you'll get education. I could even speak about, how to use something as a cautionary tale, but I will always do my absolute best to ensure that it is never framed as being harmful and shaming somebody who already is in a vulnerable position. So what do you think about this, worldies? Let me know in the comments down below. Until next time, worldies, eyes on the prize.